Evening stretched wide across the Montana plains, the last light of day dragging long shadows down the dusty road. At the road's end stood the wooden gate of a small ranch, its faded sign carved with three plain words: Carter Ranch. Before the gate swayed a lone rider, blood dark across his shirt, his cowboy hat slumped low to cover half his face. Elijah Kane, 30 years old, strong of frame yet worn thin, gripped the reins tight. Each breath tore through his chest. His horse snorted hard, sweat streaking its flanks. Reaching the gate, Elijah rasped, voice raw as if his lungs were aflame. "Ma'am, a little water. For the horse and for me." Inside the gate, Naomi Carter heard the unfamiliar call. The 40-year-old woman paused in her garden work, wiped the sweat from her brow. Her dark eyes flashed with caution, the reflex of one long used to defending herself in a world that never came easy for a black woman. Stepping from the fence, Naomi saw the young rider slumped in his saddle, blood heavy at his side. The sight dragged her back 10 years, to the day her husband had fallen after a gun accident in winter. That grief had locked her heart for a decade. Now the image of a young man trembling at her gate struck her chest with old pain. Naomi unlatched the gate, her voice firm but not unkind. "Get down, brother." "Let me see the wound," Elijah tried to smile, but his vision blurred. He pitched sideways. Naomi rushed to catch him, the calloused hands of a widow pressing against sweat and blood. The feel was strange, yet oddly familiar. He was young, strong once, but now weak as a child. She guided him slow toward her porch, every step on the hard earth a fresh beat against her guarded heart. The cabin Naomi kept was small, its paint peeled, porch sagging under years of snow and wind. Still, she lived there, stubborn as the land itself. 10 years since her husband's death, she had carried the work alone, rising before dawn, milking cows, feeding chickens, chopping wood, mending fences. Hands once meant for needle and thread had hardened to hammer and axe. Her back bent each dusk beneath the ranch she bore on narrow shoulders. She wore simple cotton dresses, patched and repatched, and none could recall the last time she walked into town dressed as a lady. Folks in Cedar Ridge knew Naomi. They tipped their hats, yet their eyes carried wariness. A black widow living alone in white Montana, strange enough to unsettle them. They respected her grit, but kept their distance, as if her presence stirred the truths they wanted buried: prejudice, injustice, the fear of difference. Naomi knew it well. She endured the cool nods at church, the marketplace where white women clustered tight while she passed like a shadow. She bit her tongue, clung to her land, her herd, and the heavy silence of her empty house. Each morning she drank her coffee alone, gaze set on the prairie where cattle dotted the green like dark seeds on cloth. Each night she sat by lamplight, needles sliding through fabric, the wind whistling through cracks where once children's laughter or a man's voice might have been. Her heart had stayed locked 10 long years, until a young rider fell at her gate. Naomi guided Elijah across the wooden threshold, his steps dragging heavy as though each breath drained what little strength remained. Her small kitchen opened under the dim glow of an oil lamp, a rough-hewn table, low chairs with paint long gone. The dry scent of bread mingled with smoke from the hearth. It was a room she knew too well, a place where for 10 years only the sighs of a lone woman had filled the air. She pulled out a chair and lowered Elijah onto it. He tried to lift his head in thanks, but his eyes clouded. Stubble clung to his jaw. dust from the trail darkening his face, giving him the look of a drifter with nowhere to land. Naomi steadied him with her calloused hand on his shoulder. The warmth beneath her palm came from a body still young, strong once, now trembling in weakness. Elijah shivered, not from pain, but from the rare truth of being touched with care. Naomi fetched a clean cloth, set water to heat. When steam rose, she sat across from him, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt to reach the wound. The fabric peeled back, stiff with brown stains. Her scissors clipped, her fingers brushed skin firm beneath. Elijah tensed, then let out a thin laugh. "Forgive me, ma'am. I ain't used to being tended proper." She did not answer, only lifted her gaze for an instant. It was brief, but it cut through him. There was no softness in her eyes, only tempered steel and sorrow long hidden. It humbled him, bowed his head. When she pressed the warm cloth against the wound, Elijah clenched his jaw. Muscles tightened, sweat broke on his brow. Naomi held steady, her tone firm. "Breathe deep. Don't fight the hurt. Let it pass." He obeyed, and their eyes caught once more. His, dark as burned oak, held the reflection of a woman opposite. Skin bronzed, curls tied back, brow glistening with sweat. For the first time in days, Elijah did not feel adrift. Naomi bound the wound with a strip of white cloth, her hands practiced, steady as when tending scraped cattle, yet not the same. Her fingers trembled each time they brushed against his solid frame. Elijah noticed, but said nothing, letting her keep her dignity. The faint scent of old soap lingered on her hands, plain and warm in a way that steadied him. When the bandage was tied, she poured him a cup of water. Their fingers touched as she passed it over. Elijah looked up and met her eyes again, no longer guarded, but touched by some small fear of their own. His smile came weary but true. "Thank you for not letting me fall outside your gate." Naomi pressed her lips tight. It had been long since a man's voice filled this kitchen. The sound shifted the air, as though even the wooden walls leaned in to listen. She drew a chair, sat at a measured distance, not close, not far. For a while, only the crack of burning wood spoke. Elijah drained the cup, set it down, yet his gaze did not leave her. He saw in her face no delicate prettiness, but a kind of beauty forged by truth and strength. Hands rough, shoulders broad from labor, eyes lined with years. That resilience itself made him feel safe, though he had never belonged anywhere. Naomi turned away, fussing with a pot on the stove as if to hide the rush of her heart. She had believed it dead with her husband a decade ago. Yet one trembling touch, one unflinching look, and it stirred again. Elijah leaned back, eyes closed. The scent of soup rose, smoke tangled with her hair. It brought him what the long trail and dusty saloon never could, the warmth of a home. He spoke no more, only whispered as though the moment might break if words grew too loud. "It's been so long since I felt alive." Naomi turned. Their eyes met once again. Neither spoke further. In the hush of that kitchen, two solitary souls brushed against each other, faint but undeniable. In the narrow wooden kitchen, Naomi lifted the lid of the simmering pot. The steam carried the scent of beef, vegetables, and herbs, drowning the sharp trace of antiseptic still hanging in the air. It had been years since she cooked for anyone but herself. Her suppers were usually little more than thin porridge or a few boiled potatoes, enough to quiet hunger. Yet tonight, her hands moved with care, as though serving something rare. Elijah sat slouched, weariness bent across his frame, but his eyes followed every motion. He said nothing, listening to the stir of the ladle, the soft clink of crockery. For a man used to hurried meals in dusty saloons, the sight of a woman at her stove, dark curls tied back, work-rough hands steady and gentle, roused in him something unfamiliar, the sense of home. Naomi set the bowl before him. Eat. It's hot, Elijah dipped his head, a faint smile breaking through his fatigue. He raised the spoon, one mouthful, and his eyes lit. Heat spread down his throat, warmth settling deep in his hollow stomach. He ate hard, with no thought to manners. Naomi watched, silent, though her mouth curved slightly. It had been too long since this kitchen held the scrape of spoon against bowl, the hungry sound of a man taking in life itself. When he set the bowl down, Naomi reached to clear it, but he spoke first, half pleading, half playful. "Ma'am, might I trouble you for another? I swear to the Lord, it's the best I've tasted in years." She paused, then let out the faintest laugh. Light stirred in her eyes, a glow not seen in years. She filled the bowl again, set it before him. Their fingers brushed as the bowl changed hands. It was nothing, a fleeting touch, but enough to draw color to her cheeks. She turned quick, hiding her face. Elijah noticed. He said nothing, only studied her features in the lamplight. Strong lines weathered by sun, yet softened in that moment of shyness. His own chest eased, the ache within quieted by something gentler. They ate in silence. But it was not the empty silence Naomi had lived with. It was easy, like the murmur of a creek. Now and then their eyes met, Elijah dropping back to his bowl, Naomi brushing hair from her brow. But both knew the room had changed. When the dishes were cleared, Naomi laid a cloth on the table and spoke plain. "You ought to rest a few days. That wound won't mend on the trail." Elijah lifted his head, surprise sparking in his dark eyes. "You mean you'd let me stay?" Naomi nodded, her voice low and steady. "This house has room, and I could use a hand in the pens. Call it payment." Elijah held her gaze longer than needed. In it, she saw gratitude, relief, and something unspoken, deeper still. He rose unsteadily, hand braced on the table. Naomi stepped forward without thought, steadying him. Her hand met his arm, and when he looked down, their eyes caught close. Her heart kicked hard. She pulled away, turning aside. Elijah's smile came quiet, wordless. He understood. Some walls take time to fall. That night, Naomi readied the seldom-used guest room. Before closing the door, she looked once more. Elijah lay back on the bed, breath evening out. His face eased as though, for the first time in years, he was safe. Naomi lingered in the hallway, palm pressed against her chest. The heart that had lain still for a decade now beat a new rhythm. She knew then, the presence of this young cowboy had already begun to shake loose the walls of her solitude. The summer storm had poured through the night, washing the red dust from the dirt roads and leaving the plains steeped in the heavy scent of wet grass. By morning the sky cleared, wide and blue, streaked with white clouds draped like loose ribbons over the far mountains. Naomi Carter pulled her coat tight, stepped off the porch, and cast her gaze over fields still shining with rainwater. Elijah was already in the horse pen. The wound at his side had closed, though a faint sting lingered with sharp movement. He shifted, testing himself, then looked her way with a quiet smile. "Ma'am, I'm strong enough to ride with you. Check the herd. Don't worry on me no more." Naomi meant to protest, but the certainty in his eyes stopped her. Since the day he'd fallen at her gate, she had not seen his face lit with such resolve. His look was young and firm, and for the first time in years, she felt safe in another's presence. She led out her familiar mare, but Elijah held a hand. "Ground still slick. Let me take the reins. You ride up front, easier to keep steady." Naomi hesitated. It had been years since she let anyone sit so near. Yet at last she nodded. He caught the reins, lifted her up, and when the horse moved, her back lay close against his chest. Heat from his younger frame passed into her, flushing her cheeks. She tried to sit straight, but each breath behind her matched her own heartbeat, shaking the walls she had built inside. They crossed fields jeweled with raindrops. Cattle spread across the valley, standing under cottonwoods, hides soaked, bellowing deep. Naomi pointed, Elijah nodded, and urged the horse forward. His gaze was sharp, the eye of a man who had driven herds across many trails. At a fallen stack of hay, Naomi stepped down, bent to lift it. The bundle was sodden, weight pulling at her shoulders. Before she could heave it, a hand touched her shoulder. "Let me." His voice was low, certain. He swung the bundle onto his own shoulder, carried it to the shed with steady steps. Naomi stood, breath ragged, eyes fixed on his frame cutting across the wet field. Sun broke from behind, laying gold on his broad back, as if heaven itself meant to show her. Not every burden had to be borne alone. When Elijah returned, their eyes met. Naomi could not hide the flicker in hers. Elijah's gaze carried something else, quiet sorrow. He saw now the calluses on her hands, the lines etched by labor around her eyes. She had lived carrying what men should have carried. In him rose a fierce wish to shield her, to lighten her load. Naomi cleared her throat, steadying herself. "You don't need. I'm used to it." Elijah smiled faintly, hand resting on the saddle horn. "Maybe so. But it don't mean you have to anymore." The words were plain, yet they pressed into her chest like a weight lifted away. She turned aside, but a small smile touched her lips, one she herself did not notice. By afternoon, they rode on, checking the range. Elijah kept to her side, pointing out a calf strayed from its mother, a break in the fence needing mending. Naomi saw then he was no drifter without use. He knew stock, could read tracks in mud, could tell when a cow was near calving. She felt both surprise and ease. On the ride home, the sky burned gold again. Naomi let Elijah keep the reins. Her back brushed his chest, and this time she did not stiffen. Instead, she rested in the sense of safety, as though if storms rose again, she would not face them alone. Elijah leaned close, breath warm at her ear. "Naomi, you're stronger than anyone I've known." She turned, met his eyes. What she saw there was bare truth, no pretense. And in that fleeting moment, Naomi felt the long solitude of 10 years begin to crack. The Carter Ranch carried the heavy scent of damp straw after rain. Inside the stable, the scrape of shovels rose and fell, mingled with the rough breath of 2 bodies at work. Elijah Kane, sleeves rolled high, muscles shifting with each motion. Naomi Carter bent low beside him, shoulders thin but steady. She had worked alone for 10 years, needing no help. Yet today, with him near, the weight of labor felt lighter. When the last heap of straw was cleared, they sat down on a wooden bench against the wall. Shafts of late light spilled through the boards, striping the dusty floor. Elijah took a pull from the water jug, tilting his head back. The cords in his neck stood out beneath sun-browned skin, sweat trailing along the line of his jaw before vanishing into his open shirt. Naomi stilled, her eyes caught, her heart striking a strange, sharp beat. Elijah, in that same moment, glanced her way and found himself just as undone. Sweat traced down from her throat, dampening the worn dress she worked in. The mark clung against her chest, and he turned aside quickly, unsettled. He had known many women in his wandering, but none stirred both longing and caution as she did. After a spell, Elijah lowered the jug. His voice broke the hush, deep and rough. I once stood in a gunfight down south. That night my only friend fell, blood spread across the dirt. I lived, but ever since when I shut my eyes I see it. Death waits on my shoulder. I've drifted, running, but never found a place that felt like mine. Naomi sat quiet, then released a breath like a locked gate opening. My husband died in a hunting accident. Back then I was young, thought a man's arms would always shield me. But when he was gone, all I had left was work and the silence. Men came after, but they saw me not as someone to love, only as flesh for their hunger. No safety, no respect. So I buried every want, told myself, alone was enough. Elijah turned to her, his gaze steady. Naomi met it, her eyes wet yet burning with truth. They spoke no more, but the silence roared louder than words. Naomi closed her eyes, lips parting with a tremor. It was not choice but heart's reflex, admitting hunger long denied. Elijah leaned in, his hand brushing her cheek, rough against her sun-warmed skin. Then his mouth found hers. Their first kiss lived in the scent of straw, in the golden dust slipping through the walls. Slow at first, cautious, as though too fragile to last. Then his hand pressed gently. Naomi shuddered, her palm rising to his chest. A fire long banked inside her broke open, fear and desire tangled. But she pulled back, breath unsteady, eyes wavering. I don't know, Elijah, if this is love or just the body's hunger after too many years of being alone. Elijah did not press. He kept the space, but his eyes held hers, earnest and raw. Whatever it is, it's true, and for the first time I don't feel alone. Naomi bowed her head, fingers twined tight. She had no answer. But one truth she could not deny. The kiss had roused the deepest part of her heart, the part she thought had died with her husband a decade past. The stable hushed, filled only with the ragged breaths of two souls seated a half-step apart. In that stillness, an unseen thread bound them close, though neither dared give it a name. Evening fell as black clouds gathered over the far ridge. Thunder rolled across the plains. Wind tore through, slamming the stable doors. Elijah caught the frame just in time before the sky split open and rain came sheeting down, turning the dirt road to town into a river of mud within breaths. From the porch, Naomi called out, her voice firm against the storm. Tonight, we're stuck here. No one's going anywhere. Elijah stepped into the kitchen, his shirt soaked through, raindrops still clinging to his hair. Naomi lit the fire, the hearth burning warm, light rising over her face. The small kitchen, once silent as stone, became the one refuge against the fury outside. They worked together on supper. Naomi cut vegetables, Elijah fed the fire. Small gestures, the sound of knife on board, the crackle of kindling. Together they formed a rhythm plain but strangely intimate. Naomi, long used to emptiness, felt the house beat with a new pulse in his presence. When the meal was done, they cleaned side by side. Elijah washed, Naomi dried. Fingers brushed over the rim of a bowl, halting them both for a breath. Rain poured outside, but inside warmth spread quiet. Naomi turned into the small washroom, and after a time stepped out in a simple beige nightdress. The cotton was worn, soft, fitting close. Lamplight caught on the dark, smooth skin of her neck and shoulders. Elijah lifted his eyes and froze. Breath stilled. Naomi felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but did not hide. Only moved slow, placing her towel on a chair. They sat near the fire. Flames cast an amber glow into Elijah's eyes. He held her gaze, voice low but steady. "Naomi, do you trust me?" She looked up, eyes deep and uncertain. After a pause, she gave a faint nod. "I do. But what of the years? I'm 40. You're 30. Does that not trouble you?" Elijah leaned closer, eyes never leaving hers. "Years mean nothing. All I know is when I'm with you, for the first time I feel I've found a place to stop. A place called home." Naomi pressed her lips, feeling the stone wall in her chest give way. For years she had lived on strength alone, never admitting need. But in that moment, under his gaze, she could no longer deny the hunger of her own heart. Elijah reached out, his rough fingers finding hers. Naomi trembled, but she did not pull away. They sat joined, listening to rain hammer the roof, their breaths falling into one rhythm. Then Elijah leaned in, his lips brushing hers. The kiss was slow, searching, yet warm enough to wake her whole body. She answered, trembling, arms rising around his shoulders. The room seemed to shrink. Firelight leapt, catching every movement. Elijah pressed his brow to hers, breath hot between them. His hand cupped her cheek, traced to her neck, lingered on her shoulder. Naomi shut her eyes, yielding. Long-buried longing surged fierce as the storm outside. Suddenly, he lifted her, arms strong, as though she weighed no more than straw. Naomi gasped, clutching to him, her heart pounding like a girl's first tremor. The bedroom door eased open, rain still drummed against the roof, but within those walls only their breaths filled the air. Elijah laid her gently on the bed. The oil lamp flickered, painting her face in trembling gold. His hand slid along her shoulder, drawing the thin fabric down. Skin glowed beneath the dim light, and he stilled in awe. Naomi closed her eyes, lips parted. No word spoken yet, no resistance. Each gesture slow, as if both knew this was not haste, but the first time they dared let their hearts open. Elijah bent to her skin, tasting salt of tears and storm, a vow unspoken. Naomi shivered, clutching his shoulders, then loosening, giving herself over to the tenderness she had long craved. In each breath, each grasp of hand, each beat of heart, they gave not only flesh but the hidden parts of their souls. That night, the wooden room became a place of rebirth. Elijah felt himself no longer drifting. Naomi felt herself no longer alone. While the storm raged, two lives once sealed found anchor, like fire-fed oil, like dry earth saved by rain. And when the thunder faded, their breaths still tangled, bearing witness to a new beginning written in silence. After that stormy night, the dawn felt different. Not because the sky was clearer or the sun brighter, but because for the first time Naomi heard a man's footsteps across her wooden floor. A simple sound, yet one that stirred her deeply. Elijah rose early, shoulders bent under a pail of water, his dark hair still damp with dew. Naomi stood by the window, fingers touching the curtain without thinking, watching his every move. From that moment, the day's chores, once heavy, seemed lighter. They swept the henhouse together, mowed grass, mended fence. It was as if the ranch had waited for this moment to welcome another man's hand. Elijah worked without complaint, sometimes whistling, turning the normally weary air into something bright. Naomi found herself smiling more, even laughing out loud, things she had not done in 10 years. That noon, when Naomi carried a basket of tomatoes from the garden, she tripped on the step and the basket slipped. Elijah reached instinctively. Tomatoes rolled, but Naomi landed safe in his arms. For a heartbeat their eyes met, breaths mingled, then they both laughed, awkward, warm. In the stable, while raking straw, Naomi bent low, sweat purling on her brow. Elijah handed her a cloth and slowly wiped her face. The simple act left Naomi dazed. Elijah could not hide the depth in his gaze. One afternoon, when sunlight gilded the dry grass, he pulled her close. No words were needed. They kissed among the smell of hay, the horses breathing nearby. This kiss was not the uncertain one before. It was full of want, as if both already knew they belonged to each other. Another evening, while Naomi kneaded dough in the kitchen, Elijah came up behind and wrapped his arms about her waist. She startled, flour dusting her hands, but when he spun her around, the heat in his look flushed her cheeks. He lifted her onto the wooden table used for preparation. Naomi gasped, but did not resist. She looped her arms around his neck. The lamp swung, casting them in motion. Where once the kitchen held only the scent of embers, now it pulsed with quick breath and matched heartbeats. In the days that followed, the ranch ceased to be only work and became a small home. Elijah hammered to repair the porch. Naomi stood below, handing nails. Once a ladder wobbled and Elijah laughed before leaping down to catch Naomi as if she were the safest anchor. They ate together, shared slices of bread and cups of coffee, as if they had been married for years. One late afternoon, after work was done, they sat on the porch. The field before them lay green after the rain. Naomi wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Elijah sat close and their fingers found each other. For the first time in a long while, Naomi felt her hand held so tightly. Elijah turned, his eyes serious in a way they hadn't been before. "Naomi," he said slowly, "I've drifted through the West, through town after town, ranch after ranch. None of them made me want to stop, until I met you." Naomi was silent. Her heart raced, but she could not take her eyes off his face. "You gave me the faith I thought I lost. You showed me I'm worthy of a peaceful life. Let me stay, not for days or weeks, but forever." Naomi felt the wind stall. She looked deep into his eyes and saw honesty without cloud. Elijah squeezed her hand tighter. "Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the years you bore alone. I want to be here with you, to rebuild, like a true family." Naomi trembled. A part of her stayed wary and afraid, but another part, the heart that had lain numb for 10 years, kindled fiercely. She pressed her lips, then nodded. When Elijah leaned to kiss the back of her hand, Naomi knew from that moment her life had turned down a different path, fragile but shining. Weeks later, the Carter Ranch seemed reborn. Elijah rose before dawn, tending the horses, then walking the fields to check the cattle. Naomi followed, basket in hand, her eyes often lingering on his tall frame moving across the land. They worked in quiet rhythm, so seamless that townsfolk began whispering. The widow Carter finally had a man by her side. That afternoon, Naomi asked Elijah to clear out the back storeroom behind the kitchen, where sacks of flour, old crates, and forgotten papers had gathered. He bent to the task, hauling out one bundle after another. As he lifted a heavy sack, a small wooden chest tumbled, the lid flying open, scattering documents across the floor. Elijah crouched to gather them and froze. The papers bore red seals, land deeds, shares in the town's general store, ownership of the sawmill and the flour mill. Beneath them lay a bank ledger, the sum written there enough to buy half of Cedar Ridge. He stood still, stunned. Naomi entered with a basket of potatoes, and in one glance at his face she understood. The basket slipped from her hands, thudding to the floor. "Elijah." Her voice broke low. He turned, eyes darkened. "So, all this time, what I saw was only a shell?" Naomi stepped closer, reaching for him, but he drew back. "I didn't hide it to trick you," she said quickly. "I only wanted peace. Folks see the money, never the woman." "I was afraid you would too," Elijah let out a bitter laugh, sharp as a knife. "I thought you were a widow who needed a shoulder, a companion. Turns out I'm nothing but a drifter who wandered into your empire. Naomi, you're rich enough to own this whole town. And me? I've got nothing but these two empty hands." Naomi clutched the table edge, voice trembling but firm. "You have a heart. That's what made me let you in." But Elijah didn't hear the plea, only the echo of his own pride. Years of hunger, of sleeping rough, of beatings handed down to the poor, all rushed back, making him feel small, pitiful, beside the woman who owned so much. He seized his coat from the peg, his hand unsteady. Naomi stepped forward, eyes wet. "Don't go. If you walk out that door, I know I'll lose you forever." Elijah halted at the threshold, his shoulders tight. He dared not turn, afraid his resolve would break. "I can't," he said, voice raw. "I can't live in the shadow of a woman who holds the world in her hand, while all I can give her is sweat." Then he opened the door. Night wind rushed in, cold rain striking Naomi's face. She reached out, but the space swallowed his tall frame. The door shut, leaving her alone with papers scattered across the floor. The deeds, the ledgers, once symbols of strength, now cut her like glass, reminders that truth had shattered the fragile joy she had just begun to hold. Naomi sank to her knees, face in her hands, and for the first time in years wept without restraint. Outside, the sound of hooves faded into distance, leaving behind a silence heavy as judgment. 3 days passed since the night Elijah rode away, and the Carter Ranch sank into a silence heavy as stone. The rooster's crow no longer roused Naomi swift from bed, nor did the horse's neighs draw her out to the porch. Chores that once gave rhythm now dragged like chains, each step an effort. On the 4th afternoon, the town's errand boy stopped by. He said he had seen Elijah, beard unkempt, sitting alone in the saloon at Cedar Ridge, his eyes lost, as if the world had turned from him. Naomi's heart clenched. A part of her felt relief, knowing at least he was still near. Another part ached, knowing he drowned in drink and sorrow. That evening, Naomi sat alone in her kitchen. The oil lamp flickered, casting her shadow long on the wall. Before her lay a blank sheet of paper, an old fountain pen, and a bottle of black ink. Hands once used to rope and hoe now shook as they held the pen. She drew a long breath, then pressed to write, each word carved like a wound. Elijah, if you are reading this, it means I lacked the courage to stand before you. I feared that if I faced you, my voice would fail, and I would lose you once more. Elijah, I never despised you. From the day you stepped into my small kitchen, I knew I was no longer alone. I saw you work until your body ached, not for yourself, but to share my burden. I saw you bend to mend the fence. I saw you shoulder water as though it was your duty here. Each day, I believed more that you belonged to this place, belonged to me. You say I am wealthy, and you are empty-handed. But Elijah, I have never looked at you that way. I only saw a man who made me feel safe, whose presence steadied my heart, whose touch woke it again. You think me strong, yet for 10 years I lived on emptiness. Only when you came did I learn what it meant to be needed, what it meant to be loved. Money. Elijah, it has never given me warmth through the long nights. It has never wiped my tears. But your hands, your eyes, those did. You believe you are unworthy. Then hear me plain. It is I who feel unworthy to be given the honest heart of a man like you. I need no riches brought to me. I only ask you to bring yourself with your calloused hands, your haunted past, your sorrow. For all of it makes you Elijah, the man I love. If you still feel small before me, then remember, I tremble before you. We are both flawed, both wounded. But perhaps, if we join, our wounds may mend. Please do not forsake this love. Naomi. Naomi set down the pen. A tear fell, smearing the ink over the word love. She wiped it quickly, but the stain remained, proof of a truth that could not be hidden. Outside, misting rain swept the plains, wind sighing through the wide fields. Naomi sat motionless for a long time, then folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, sealed it shut. She placed it in the errand boy's hand, her voice unsteady. Take this to Elijah Kane. Tell him. He must read it at once. When the door closed, behind him, Naomi sat alone with the oil lamp burning low. She knew the letter was more than explanation. It was the last thread she held, the knot that would decide whether Elijah would return or vanish from her life forever. A week passed since Naomi sent the letter, and still no answer came. Each morning she stood on the porch and watched the road toward town, hoping to see the familiar figure ride back. Only the wind creaked the gate and dust rolled out past the fence. Night after night she sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the edge of the chair Elijah had used, listening to a silence that felt like a verdict. Her heart pushed her. If he would not return, she would go find him. On the 8th afternoon, Naomi wrapped her shawl, tied her kerchief, and rode straight for Cedar Ridge. The red road into town glowed under the sunset, but her chest was heavy. The Cedar Ridge saloon was always loud. Clinking glasses, a banjo out of tune, the raucous laughter of cowboys. Naomi pushed open the door, and her eyes found Elijah at once. He sat alone in a corner, lamplight falling on his disordered hair. A bottle sat more than half empty before him. His hand gripped a glass. His broad shoulders seemed to have folded in. His eyes dulled. He was no longer the proud man who had ridden with her across the fields, who had mended fence at her side. Naomi stepped forward. A few heads turned. A whisper ran through the room at the sight of Widow Carter. But she paid no mind. "Elijah," she said softly, and he looked up. For a moment their eyes met. He looked at her the way a man looks when joy and pain meet. Then he turned away, voice hoarse. "You shouldn't be here." Naomi pulled a chair and sat facing him, the wood protesting. "If I don't come, how long do you plan to keep hiding?" Elijah smiled thinly and raised his glass. "I'm not hiding. I just know I don't belong with you. Naomi, I'm a drifter with empty hands. And you—" He paused, his eyes flicking as if the memory of papers and deeds were before him. "You own land. Half a town even. Folks will say I'm after your money. They'll always say that Naomi looked straight into his eyes and saw him torn apart by that doubt." She reached and pushed the glass aside. "Elijah, how many more whispers must I endure? I've spent 10 years living under stares and gossip. I don't want a man to decorate my standing. I need someone to live with me." He clenched his fists. "But I can't provide for you. I have no money, no land. What can I put on the table?" Naomi laughed, the sound cut by tears. "You think I need someone to feed me? Elijah, I survived 10 years on my own. I know how to make a living, how to keep land. Not once in those 10 years did I hear a man's steps in this house. Not once did someone share the load. I don't want a provider. I want a companion." Elijah lifted his face. Hope flashed, then faded. "What about my pride? How can I live with the thought that I'm a guest under your roof?" Naomi set her rough hand over his trembling one. The calloused palm of a working woman closed on the shaky hand of a lost man. "You are not a guest. You gave me more than any deed could. You gave me laughter, warmth, a reason to believe I could be loved. Elijah, you are the one who has provided for me, not with gold, but with your heart." Her words fell into him. The noise in the saloon dimmed to a distant hum. Only Naomi's hand holding his remained plain and real. He swallowed. "I fear I will fail you. That one day you'll look back and see I'm not worthy." Naomi's eyes filled, but her voice was steady. "Elijah Kane, I have lived long enough to know a person's worth isn't counted in money. It's in how he looks you in the eye and tells you the truth. And you are doing that now." He looked at her a long time. The dark in his eyes softened, and a sliver of light returned. The glass sat untouched. His hand squeezed Naomi's. "Naomi," he breathed out, as if letting go of burden. "If you still want me, I won't leave." Naomi nodded, tears falling, and a bright smile breaking through. "I never stopped wanting you, Elijah." In that crowded, curious room, under many watching eyes, they sat facing one another, with hands clasped. No grand promises were needed. That quiet grip and the look between them said the storm was passing. The next morning, with first light finding its way through the dusty inn window, Elijah woke to a churn of thoughts. Naomi's letter lay on the wooden table, its paper slightly wrinkled, ink blurred where tears had fallen. He read it again and again. Each line struck at the stubborn pride in his chest, cracking it open, revealing what he had denied. He wanted her. wanted to stay, more than anything else. He shrugged into his coat, left the near-empty bottle on the table, and stepped outside. The red road back to the ranch stretched under the morning sun, long, clear as if pointing him home. With every mile his step grew lighter, as though he were walking back to where he truly belonged. Naomi was outside gathering straw. Her shadow stretched long over the dry grass. At the sound of hooves, she looked up. Her heart tightened and then burst open when she saw him riding in. She stood frozen, clutching the bundle of straw, afraid if she let go the sight would vanish. He dismounted and quickened to her. No words were needed. Their eyes said enough. Still, Elijah halted, breathed deep, and spoke. "Naomi, I have to confess something. I hid it from you." She flinched at the familiar fear, but his gaze no longer avoided hers. "I have an inheritance, so," he said slowly. "Land in the east, a little money in the bank. My father left it, but I never took it. I hated him, and I was proud. I wanted to live by my own hands, not by the coins of the past. So I kept it hidden. I feared that if you knew, you'd think I only came for what I could gain." Naomi stood silent, her fingers tightening around the straw. Elijah went on. "But when I learned your secret, my pride blotted out reason. I left instead of trusting the love you showed me. I was wrong." He stepped closer, placed his rough hand on her arm. "I don't want to hide anymore. No more secrets between us. Only truth." And a promise. Tears streamed down Naomi's cheeks, but a soft smile came. She let the bundle drop to the ground and took his hand. "Elijah, I never cared whether you were rich or poor. I only wanted you to be real. If from now on we can look at each other openly, nothing else scares me." They stood in the yard, prairie wind lifting the golden straw around them. Elijah bent and pressed a kiss to her sweat-darkened brow, a kiss that was both devotion and vow. "I promise," he whispered. "No more hiding. I won't run away. I'll build this home with you." Naomi pressed her cheek against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. She felt then that his promise was not mere words, but the resolve of a man who had wandered and carried shame and now chose to stay. That afternoon they put the stable to rights, a beginning marked by shared labor. When Elijah lifted a sack of hay, Naomi did not hinder him. She watched him with a trust that steadied her. When she carried a basket of greens from the garden, Elijah stepped forward to take it, as if sharing every small task mattered. In the dim kitchen, Naomi lit the oil lamp and set out their meal. Elijah took his familiar seat at the table, and for the first time the empty chair opposite her no longer haunted the room. He was there, in truth, in presence. Outside, the sunset poured red across the plains. In that light, Naomi and Elijah sat together, hands clasped, as if every crack had been sealed by the single choice they had made. No more secrets, only promise and a future to build together. The Montana morning opened wide. The sky stretched high and clear, as if nature itself waited on something solemn. The breeze carried the scent of wild grass and dry earth, soft as a hymn for Naomi Carter and Elijah Kane's wedding day. Word of it had run through Cedar Ridge, and before long the quiet road to Naomi's ranch filled with wagons and hoofbeats, laughter threading through the dust. Folks who once whispered, who once cast wary eyes at the Black Widow, came all the same. Something in this story had stirred their curiosity, and slowly, their respect. Out in the yard, Elijah and a handful of friends had raised a pine wood arch, woven through with wildflowers plucked from the fields. There was no silk, no candlelight, only the fragrance of open land and calloused hands at work. Yet to Naomi, it was the finest altar she had ever known. She stepped out of her cabin in a dress of plain ivory, stitched in haste by Mrs. Henderson and the town girls over the past week. She was no longer the widow bent over her chores, but a woman stepping into something new. Her eyes found Elijah, broad-shouldered in a white shirt and brown vest, sun-browned face alight, and the world seemed to draw down to the two of them alone. When the banjo struck its tune, Naomi walked toward the arch. Her steps trembled, but Elijah's gaze held steady, pulling her forward. He stretched out his hand, rough, scarred, sure, and Naomi laid her own into it, warmth spreading through her. The town preacher stood before them, voice low and steady. Today, beneath Montana's vast sky, before God's creation and this gathered community, we witness the union of two souls who have known loss and who now have found each other. Naomi's eyes welled. Memories flashed. The 10 silent years, the whispers behind her back, the cold nights alone. Then it all dissolved when Elijah's grip closed firmer around her hand. "Do you swear to walk with her all your days?" the preacher asked Elijah. "In lean years or plenty, in sickness and in health?" Elijah looked straight into Naomi's eyes, voice firm. "I do." Her heart raced when the words came to her. "I do," she answered, her voice ringing clear, her eyes bright with tears. Applause rose around them. Children darted across the yard, tossing wildflowers into the wind. Elijah bent and kissed Naomi, not with hesitation, not with fear, but openly. A kiss that claimed them both, as husband and wife before all eyes. Afterward, the ranch rang with banjo strings and singing. Long tables held pies, roast meat, garden greens, passed and shared in the spirit of a fair day. Folks gathered, telling stories of the months past, how Elijah had worked, how Naomi had endured. No one spoke of color, of age, or of land. They saw only two souls bound together, the look between them strong enough to silence old judgments. As the sun dropped low, painting the fields in deep red, Naomi and Elijah stood under the porch roof. From afar came the sounds of laughter and song, but between them lay a quiet apart. Naomi whispered, "I once thought my life would be nothing but work and silence. Then you came and gave me a true home." Elijah bowed his head to hers. "And you gave me back the faith I thought was gone. From now on, neither of us walks alone." There beneath Montana's wide sky, with prairie winds circling and the faint strains of music drifting, they held each other. It was no longer the start of something uncertain, but the firm rooting of joy, set deep, steady, destined to grow as strong as the land itself. The years passed since that wedding beneath the Montana sky, and the little ranch that had once known only wind and Naomi's solitary footsteps was transformed beyond recognition. From the road one could see straight white fences wrapping the fields, a cattle herd grown twice its size, and smoke curling from the chimney each evening like a signal that here, at last, was a true home. Elijah kept his promise. He was not only Naomi's husband, but the backbone that steadied and rebuilt the place. Each morning before the sun crested the hills, he was out with the horses, checking the herd, while Naomi tended the kitchen, the smell of warm bread spilling through the rooms. Together they stitched the ranch back into life, not with sudden wealth, but with sweat, faith, and the slow work of love. Word of their union spread across Sud. Neighbors who once whispered learned to speak to them with warmth. They came to buy milk, to trade beef, to ask for seed corn, and no longer looked upon Naomi with suspicion. The children of the town, who once stared, now called her Miss Carter with shy affection. Elijah became the man people turned to when fences broke or cattle strayed. The greatest joy arrived in their second spring together. Naomi, already in her 40s, bore a son. She had believed motherhood closed to her, but fate was kind. The infant's first cry split the air, his tiny hands reaching blindly in her arms, while Elijah stood beside her, eyes wet, clutching her hand with a trembling grip. "We'll call him Samuel," Naomi whispered. Elijah nodded, and from that moment the boy became the new light of their house. The following year brought a daughter, Ruth, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's hesitant smile. The ranch, once hushed, rang now with laughter and the wails of babies. Naomi, who had endured 10 years of silence, found herself alive in the soft hours of rocking her children, in mornings watching Ruth totter barefoot in the grass, in afternoons when Elijah lifted Samuel onto a saddle for his first lessons. One evening, Naomi stood on the porch, watching Elijah carry Samuel on his shoulders, while Ruth clung to his vest, all three laughing as they spun across the yard. Naomi's hand drifted to her belly, empty now, yet full. She needed no more children. Her family was whole. The ranch itself grew strong. Elijah built new barns, raised a granary stout against winter storms. Naomi kept the books and met with town merchants, shrewd and steady. No one spoke any longer of Naomi's inheritance as a shadow. It was seen instead as the seed joined with Elijah's labor to raise a place of abundance. But the true treasure was not in land or cattle. It was at the supper table, where Samuel recounted the birth of a calf. Ruth sang a shy hymn from church. Elijah listened with that quiet smile, and Naomi sat gazing, her heart near bursting. Still, Naomi never forgot the years of loneliness. She taught her children with them simple words. Riches may come and go, but kindness and truth must be carried to the end. Elijah added, "And never let pride make you turn away from the one you love." Once, when Ruth was teased in town for the color of her skin, Naomi pulled her into her lap, her voice firm and tender. "Remember, child, what makes you worthy is not how others see you, but how you treat them." Ruth lifted her eyes, shining with a new understanding. By the 5th winter, they opened their home to neighbors for a gathering. People brought pies and cider, children's laughter filled the cold air, and men raised their mugs in cheer. Elijah stood with an arm around Naomi's shoulders. Samuel raced among the guests. Ruth pressed close to her mother's dress, and Naomi looked up at the star-swept sky. In that moment she remembered the woman she once was, alone and shunned, and she whispered inwardly, "At last, you have found home." When the crowd had gone, Elijah and Naomi sat on the porch in the hush. The wind moved through the pines, but within there was only peace. Elijah took her hand and murmured, "We've done it, Naomi. Not just survived, but lived." She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes on the fields now wrapped in snow, the herd resting quiet in their pens. Inside, Samuel and Ruth slept soundly, their breathing steady. It was proof enough. They had come through the storm, and every day now was gift. Beneath the moonlight, the ranch was no longer a shelter for a widow and a wandering horseman. It had become a true home, where a late-found love had blossomed, where children's voices joined the prairie winds, where the story stretched on with no ending in sight. And perhaps, in looking back on Naomi Carter and Elijah Kane, one truth shines through. Love does not always come when we are young and bright, but often when life seems finished. Naomi endured 10 silent years, the sting of gossip, the emptiness of her cabin. Elijah bore pride and shame that made him flee happiness again and again. Yet they found one another, not in perfection, but in honesty and courage. The wedding beneath the Montana sky, the laughter of children, the warmth of a crowded supper table. These were not gifts of chance or wealth, but the fruit of choosing to love again despite old wounds. That, more than anything, was the blessing laid in their hands, a family, a resting place for weary hearts. Perhaps you too, listening now, have known loss, or walked years in solitude. Perhaps you've thought joy has passed you by. But remember this: if Naomi, at 40, could find love, if Elijah, burdened by pride, could open his heart, then so may we all. Love does not ask our age or our fortune. It asks only truth and the courage to say yes. And as this tale closes, I leave you a question, gentle and quiet. What moment in your life made you believe, I am no longer alone? Share it with us in the comments, so we may listen, comfort, and smile together. If this story has touched your heart, please press like, tap subscribe, and ring the little bell, so you won't miss the next of our Wild West love stories. These are not only tales of the frontier, but reminders that after the longest winters, spring always comes. Thank you, dear friends, for walking with us, for keeping the flame of love alive.